Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, and it is a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady of Canterbury and her own personal testimony in terms of some of the, quite frankly, this day and age, the awful abuse that I think too many representatives, both of this House and members of the Jewish community, have suffered. And I say this as someone who actually, I've had the greatest privilege when I was growing up. I grew up alongside the Jewish community. And I think one of the most extraordinary things, as I used to go to school with my friends and our school coach every day from Radlett to Watford, was that never ever did we think 40 years later that anti-Semitism would be in the ascendancy as it is in the way in which members have spoken about so clearly today. And it is within very much that context, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I'm speaking to very much welcome this bill. And I actually want to congratulate both frontbenchers for their contributions today. We need to bring this forward. I've always felt that. For me, that is unequivocal. But I think what is so astonishing, actually, was a former Prime Minister, it was David Cameron, who made the commitment many years ago now, in terms of having this memorial. And also citing the location that has been subject to a great deal of debate already today. I have to say that while the decision is so welcome, the commitment to bring this memorial forward, which is absolutely essential, clearly has to be done so with a great deal of sympathy to the surroundings on the very points that have been made by members in this House today around the sensitivities of the location. But it's vital that we go ahead with this memorial because it serves as such a powerful, and I think quite a sombre reminder actually, of a monument that represents the loss suffered by the Jewish community and Jewish people through that most horrendous and horrific period in our history. And it is a living history, and we should always remember that and recall that as well. And it is on that point as well that I think we should actually give some thought and consideration and some support to many of the leaders within the Jewish community, from the Jewish Leadership Council. I've had the privilege of working with the CST and their leadership as my time as Home Secretary, but also as during my time as Member of Parliament. And I do think it is so sobering that when you think about the reason why the CST exists in this day, it is still to protect the Jewish community from living their lives day in, day out. And, you know, I still have parents that live in with the Jewish community in a part of Hertfordshire. And when I visit them, we still see local private security firms outside the synagogue driving up and down our roads to protect the community. We have incredible Jewish schools that are protected day in, day out, as we've heard already in testimony in this House today, by private security firms because of the rise of anti-Semitism and the level of intolerance and wrongly the hatred that exists across society, which is why education is so vital. And of course, the Holocaust marked one of the darkest and most sinister moments in the history of humanity. And none of us can forget that, and we don't want any future generations to forget that as well. This is how we improve ourselves as human beings. This is how we learn to respect one another. This is exactly how we learn to work with each other, live alongside each other, regardless of our backgrounds or even faith or anything of that nature. And it was that cruelty shown in the most systematic persecution and that awful word, that barbaric word, the extermination of the Jewish people in Europe. That's a horrible sentence to even utter, along with the persecution and the murder of other minority groups. This continues to shock. It shakes us to our core, I think, as human beings, but it did happen. It did exist in the way in which it has done. And we have a responsibility and a moral duty to remember the barbaric work, the barbarism that took place back in those days, back then. That was 6 million people who were the victims of genocide, motivated, and let's just think about this, motivated by hatred, prejudice, and quite frankly, an intolerable and evil ideology. So I do want to, in particular, pay tribute to the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and the Holocaust Education Trust for the work that they do. And also, I'm going to say this now as well for many, many colleagues in this House, for colleagues that represent the communities and on the APPGs, but also those who've given voice to some of the intolerance that we see in, day in, day out, but champion communities across the country. Because I'm afraid even in my time as Home Secretary, I witnessed the most abhorrent anti-Semitism, and representatives from the Jewish community would come and see me frequently. And I'm sorry to say, but obviously we worked with the police, and we had to work with the police to bring justice as well to members of the community. And I recall it was only 2 years ago, in fact, we had those awful car rallies coming from certain parts of the country straight into North London with the most vile abuse, quite frankly, hatred, intolerance and threats to harm and hurt members of the Jewish community taking place. And these organisations work tirelessly to educate and inform in our schools and elsewhere about the horrors of the past, the Holocaust and other genocides. And we should also remember other genocides that have taken place, and frequently too. And it is important to spread and communicate this never again message, and to dispel some of the appalling, narratives that have existed, but also the language that is used against communities. And of course, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and the Educational Trust, they do incredible work, and we've seen this organising visits to Auschwitz. And in the run-up to the Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January, the Holocaust Education Trust produces resources on the Holocaust and other genocides for use in schools. I'm sure many colleagues have been into the schools, their own local schools, to see this work come together. I've been delighted actually to forward some of this to my own local schools, and this year again I joined many of my local schools as they had the fitting commemorations and recognised the work of the Learning, the Education Trust, but also with this new Learning and Memorial Centre. It will be an incredible facility for future generations and young people to come together and, yes, to be educated and to learn about the horrors of the past, but also to make sure that such events actually change the way in which we think for the betterment of humanity and society. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, for many of those who have met or heard Holocaust survivors speak, and I've had an incredible privilege actually of meeting many, and also growing up alongside those when I lived in Radlett in Hertfordshire as well. We've been just moved by their accounts of the suffering and the loss. And I have to say, if I may just commend the Honourable Member for Hemsworth as well for the very, very strong way in which he spoke about his own family background and also what took place in the 1950s in particular. I mean, that was just absolutely shocking. And that has gone on. We should just recognise this to shape many of these organisations. CST exists for that very reason. What happened back then, and some of the leadership of the CST right now came from some of those dreadful experiences. But those stories of resilience and their inspirational tales and their fortitude have gone on to define, I think, the Jewish community in successive generations. They have experienced and survived unimaginable suffering, and I do pay tribute to them. I think of them frequently, actually, in terms of where I even base myself now in North London, about their own suffering, but also the courage that they still have to speak about their experiences and also their campaigns that they have led. It's been 78 years since those concentration camps that were the sites of such horrors were liberated. And thank goodness they were liberated. And as each year passes, the number of Holocaust survivors sadly reduces. So I think we think of them really, don't we, on a day like today, when actually we're privileged in this House to even have this debate, I think, to reflect and to recognise the past and the horrors, but also really pay tribute to them. And I say that again within the context of what we see in this modern day, anti-Semitism on the rise, social media intolerances as well, and abuse and trolling, as the Honourable Member, our friend from Canterbury, has spoken about already. So that is why I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill is so important. I would like to see it pass. But I also do think we do have to demonstrate a degree of respect for many of the concerns that have been raised today. That is right that we do that in a very respectful way. I personally think that there can be no better place in our country to have a memorial located obviously at the heart of democracy, because it's a reminder of how fragile and precious our democracy is. And again, when we look around the world right now, look at how the flame of democracy can so easily be extinguished. I saw that there was a debate in one of the other chambers on Hong Kong earlier on as well, where again people have been fleeing for their own lives because of the national security laws there. But also it's the importance of our country standing up to against those who commit such atrocities in the world. And our commitment to defend freedom, liberty, and human rights. So this bill absolutely reflects that in the right kind of way, and I'm confident that the centre can be built in a sympathetic and respectful way, and I hope that colleagues will work to ensure that happens. So it is why, Mr Deputy Speaker, I stand today to support the passage of this bill, and I know that all colleagues will work, I think, with mutual recognition and respect for many of the sensitivities that have been aired today. Thank you.